Welcome back to another episode of War Hero to Superhero, helping military veterans and first responders transform their lives from the prayer room to the boardroom. We are in our superhero battle room with all the fancy buttons because this guest played with so many buttons I couldn't even handle it. I remember days that I worked on military vehicles and oh man, I almost died in those vehicles with so many buttons. But this gentleman is an Army Black Hawk helicopter pilot who knows how to take those leadership skills from pressing buttons and leading teams and everything else now to the boardroom via transforming lives through music. So this is going to be a great interview because it's the last time I had a Black Hawk helicopter pilot in my presence was over a decade ago. So we're going to bring back some memories and bring back some great stories. I'm going to bring Jon Foti to the stage. I hope I got your last name right because it was the first time I ever said it on my mouth. So Jon, do I have you?
Yeah, I'm here. Close enough. Foti, I've gotten Foti, Fatty. I've gotten everything over the years. I just responded all.
Oh, okay, same thing as mine. Mine's one syllable. It's Faust and it's Faust and whatever. And sometimes even called Fausteroo. And I'm like, you added syllables.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the weirdest one I get sometimes is Fox. I'm like,
I think I would like that one. I think I would like that one. I think I'd want to be like if I was like a lieutenant or a captain or a warrant officer, I'd want to be Fox because I think that would be my code name if I was going to fly a helicopter.
If I ever need a stage name, I'll get that.
There you go. Well, you're in song, so you might need one.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the early years. What inspired you to join the military?
The war in Iraq. Honestly, I had went to high school, 2004 to 2008, and really everything on the news was, at least in my opinion, was really the war in Iraq. I saw that as a kid and always thought to myself, like, I wonder what I would be like in combat, or I wonder how I would respond in situations like that. And so when I remember when I was in my junior year in high school, all I wanted to do was enlist. I talked to my parents about it. And by the time I was a senior in high school, they convinced me, okay, well, at least let's go look at a few colleges. And then at a certain point in that process, my dad was like, I'm fine with you joining the military, but I really, really want you to do ROTC. And so I got committed to going to college and went the ROTC route. But the number one thing that really motivated me was the war in Iraq, right? And it felt weird being at home knowing that other people not much older than me were going to Iraq and fighting, right? And I just saw that as a huge draw my whole childhood life. And then when I got to ROTC, I actually planned on doing naval ROTC, but I didn't get a scholarship my first semester. This was 2008. I literally just walked down the street at the University of Tampa. I walked into the university Army ROTC department and asked if they had scholarships, and they said yes. And the next day I was at PT. That's honestly how I joined the Army. Absolutely loved my time in the Army. And so very grateful for that opportunity through Army ROTC.
Well, I'm glad you joined for more of a noble reason than mine. Mine was because of a girl. So I didn't sign up for anything more noble and I wasn't watching the news. So I give you kudos that you did better than me. And I did 24 years. And I guess the girl was the catalyst to eventually serve our military. Yours was like right up front. You're like honoring everything else. And I'm like, cute girl, let's go to the recruiting. Right. So I give you kudos that you didn't allow girls to persuade you in, because for me, wow, that was like a culture shock afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So going with that, so you came in because of Iraq and honor and dignity and everything else, all those things to go over and to serve. So you served, if I remember on your bio, I think about 10 years. So what was the backstory for becoming a veteran? So you served in Iraq, and that was a long tour in a sense, like us as a nation. So what made you make that transformation to veteran?
Yeah. So I was active duty for six years, 12 to 18. I had gotten back from Afghanistan, and shortly after I got back from Afghanistan, my dad died. And so I go through this process with my dad and, go through his estate. And right at the end of that, I PCS'd back to Fort Rucker for the U.S. Army's Captain Career Course. And so, U.S. Army officers, right, they go through their lieutenant time, they pin captain, and then typically not long after they make captain, they get sent back to their branch headquarters, and they'll do something called the captain's career course, which is essentially just preparing you to be a commander. And at that course, towards the end of it, I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I had no idea really what type 1 diabetes was. So I got grounded and referred to medical separation, referred to med board on the exact same day. And I was out of the Army 8 months later. And so I stayed at Fort Rucker, did, an administrative job, a leadership XO role in U.S. Army's flight school. And then 8 months later, I was medically separated out of the Army. And to be honest, it was kind of bitter because I felt like I had left a lot of meat on the bone with my military career. I had always really wanted to be a commander. I never had the opportunity to be a commander. And so it kind of ended much shorter than I thought it would. I was one of those people that said like, oh, I'm definitely going to get out, but never put a plan in place. So I most certainly would still be in right now because I would have just kept going with the Army life and never really looking towards anything else. And so I formally got medically boarded because of type 1 diabetes in 2018 and moved to Colorado and just hung out and did school for a year. And then my wife, after I got out, joined the Air Force. And so then we got stationed in Oklahoma for her first duty assignment. So it's kind of a strange transition for me, but unfortunately forced. And so for anyone listening, I hope you or no one has type 1 diabetes, because even though I was bitter at the Army for the time, there's a reason they don't let type 1 diabetics be pilots in the Army most of the time. So, yeah.
I would like to go over and explain to our audience a little bit about med boards because I've been through a couple myself, and also like to have you, after I explain what type 1 diabetes. I always get that confused, so I'm going to ask that question in a second.
Oh, absolutely.
So on the med board, so our audience going to listen, we had another guy that talked about a med board on an episode that's going up in about an hour. So med boards work like this. We go over and we get diagnosed with something. Maybe it's ER or something else, or maybe it's something you come back Iraq and you're obviously missing a limb or things of that nature. They do a line of duty determination. So people that are on the active service listening to this, you get a line of duty determination. They're going to go figure out medically where you stand. They usually put you on a medical profile at that point. So depending on your job, some jobs you can keep doing. I work a desk job. My medical profile is continue to type at the desk job. If you're working the job you worked as a helicopter pilot, you can't really go over and fly that bad boy and say missing a leg or have type 1 diabetes, or let's say you have seizures or whatever it is. Yeah. And then the veteran, the future veteran, is in limbo. They get put on desk duty, or if you're like me, I'm always on desk duty, so it didn't change. So, and then you're just sitting there. When it finally gets to SG, which is medical, it's the Surgeon General and medical, whatever that command is, and they make a decision, it happens instantaneous. So the veteran's just going along. They're already sticker shocked, overwhelmed, working the job. They're still on orders. Doesn't matter if it's guard, reserve, or active. And then one day you get a decision. Me, I got my decision in 3 days after it got there, and they said return to duty. Other people get told they're done. And it's usually in 30 days, they go from like total military to total veteran. And they're just, even though they're doing the transactions for getting out of service, they are like shell-shocked the entire time. So when you meet a veteran that has been med boarded, med separated, or they're going through a med board or going through a med separation, or even a medical retirement, which a medical retirement is the best option, they are in a sticker shock because they're just waiting. They can become angry, bitter, sad, depressed, and then they go from that to totally gone. So if you can describe to me what type 1 diabetes is so our audience understands type 1 and type 2, because I think what one is more of obesity based and then one's more genetic based or caused by a disorder. So if you could just explain that a little bit more.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll try and give a little context. So at the time, one of the reasons that I started to know that I was sick was because I was so weak all the time. And so at the time I was training for an ultra marathon. So I was at Fort Rucker, Alabama, and I was at the captain's career course. I had a lot of time to run. And so at the time I was probably running, 50, 60 miles a week. And I was training for an ultra marathon that I was going to sign up for out in California. And I got to the point where I could just barely run. I would go home after class, after working out, and I'd sleep for 12, 14 hours. I would wake up the next day and I'd be falling asleep on my way into PT at Fort Rucker. And and it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm in like some sort of like high fatigue, illness. Maybe I've overtrained, maybe I have mono or like low testosterone or something. So I just took a few weeks off. And at the end of the captain's career course, this was 2017, we have it like a PT test, right? Like the final PT test before, you finish the course and then get shipped out to your next unit. And I was like, man, I'm going to smoke this PT test. I'm going to take 2 weeks off. I'm going to be well rested. And about 20 feet into the run, I had to start walking. And keep in mind, like the months leading up to this, I had been running, pretty consistently, 630 miles. And here I am walking on this PT test. And I barely pass this PT test. I fail like almost 2 seconds later if I cross the line. And so I immediately go down to the flight surgeon and just ask him like, hey, run my blood, like something's wrong. And they call me back later in about 2 hours. I'm in class and they're like, you're an insulin dependent diabetic. Like you need to come to the hospital now. And so I'm like, oh, wow. And so the biggest difference is type 1 diabetics, and a lot of times it's called juvenile diabetes. And it is largely diagnosed in younger age, right? So you'll have individuals anywhere from 1.5 to about 15. They'll get diagnosed with type 1, but sometimes called juvenile diabetes. And it's where your pancreas just, and more specifically as an autoimmune condition, your body just starts attacking the beta cells inside of your pancreas that are responsible for creating that insulin. And then of course, type 2 is a little different. And a lot of people lobby for type 1 to get a different name because it doesn't share any of the same issues as type 2 diabetes other than the symptoms, right? So high blood sugar. And so type 2 diabetics, they still can create insulin, but they have such a high insulin resistance, sometimes because of genetics, but usually because of lifestyle and weight, that even though they're creating insulin, their body's not able to keep up, essentially. And so, weight is a leading factor, but there are some individuals, depending on, like your heritage and your culture, where you can be young and relatively in good shape and skinny and still have pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes because of like genetic inclinations. Right? I'm not like a provider, so my verbiage on that is not great, but yeah. So so sometimes people, when I tell them I get separated for type 1 diabetes, they're like, oh, you couldn't just like work out more or like, lose weight or eat better. And I'm like, well, turns out I was like super fit, like turns out I was doing all of the right things, extreme dieting, a lot of great exercise, really well focused on the career. And then type 1 kind of disrailed that. But yeah, so that's a long way of saying those are the two differences. You might not have wanted as deep of an answer, but yeah, typically type 1 diabetics, it's an autoimmune condition. Type 2 diabetes is, a different kind of medical condition, largely from insulin resistance as opposed to the lack of insulin entirely. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, long definition, short definition. I asked the question, so come on. If our audience will either love it, hate it, or in between. The good thing is we can opus clip it and make it go viral. So we'll just work with that.
There you go. Yeah. And I always love educating people on type 1 because it is a very unfortunate illness. And most people are connected to a type 1 diabetic somewhere in their family or friend group. And so support them however you can. One day there'll hopefully be a cure.
Yeah. So there's a lot of veterans that go over and struggle with many different things. So just getting that information out there that, hey, you can look like, this is how I call it. I look great on the outside, but I'm melting on the inside because I'm a disabled vet too. And the thing is a lot of them are invisible diagnoses that you can't go and see. It's just like, just because you have all your arms and your legs and you think you have all your faculties, you have other things that are going for you that are not so positive. So I'm like the Eminem. I'll look good on the outside, praise Jesus, but I know I'm melting on the inside, and all of us are a little bit too. So going through that,
there are a handful of veterans with type 1 diabetes in the military, but normally it's because they survived their med board, and I did not. But if you get diagnosed with type 1 in the military, of course you can't join the military if you have type 1, but if you get it while you're in, which happens to a handful of service members every year around the world, very, very low statistical probability. A few have survived med board, mostly by being in branches like medical or the chaplain services that kind of allow them to retain. And at the time, there was an option for me to pursue that, and I just didn't. And honestly, looking back, I wish I had, because I miss putting on the uniform every day, even all these years later. But yeah, so.
Yeah, that is the one thing I should probably explain about med boards too, is that med boards is also the time of year, the branch of service you're in, and the job that you are. I got returned to duty because we're desperately hurting, number one. And two, that my job is via a keyboard. So all I can do is I can do it anywhere. So unless I go blind, lose both my hands, and can't speak,
Yeah,
I'm still qualified. So definitely don't go over and assume that people's lives are over or vice versa in a med board, but also be prepared that your life can change in a moment. So being empathetic, visiting. So as our listeners are going over and watching and listening, that when you hear someone, they say med board, empathy is the biggest thing that we needed that season. So going from there, let's go talk about, it's the unfortunate that you got to 10 years and you had to go over and get out. But how was the transition? 2018, I hope, was better. I've talked to veterans from Vietnam up to current. I just wanted to see your perspective of how the transition when you left the military.
So I transitioned, went through transition assistance program through the Army at Fort Rucker. I had a pretty great experience, right? I think, like many veterans, I saw that on the backside of the Army, the prospects aren't always as bright as you probably hope they would be. And I think a lot of times that is just, trying to network and communicate your experiences. And a lot of times veterans, as they're leaving a military base, a lot of times they're trying to move really far to a place they want to live. And that transition can be challenging because you don't always have the network to facilitate and support that, right? You don't have 1,000 business cards to the address you're going to that could help you easily get a job at the salary that you would like, and the level that you would like, and the role that you would like. And so I kind of learned that, transition wise, I think I was in a really great place because of the med board. I got out with help from the VA because of that integrated disability evaluation system between the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs, so I'm grateful for that. And that actually put me ahead of many veterans who are trying to transition on their own and do the VA process by themselves. And they're having to do all these things after they go through this TAPS course, right? And along with moving, along with job searches or school, whatever. And so I felt like maybe I had a little bit of a heads up there. So anyone listening, if you're in a med board, that is one of the perks, is that you'll get out, hopefully, if you do get medically separated, with a leg up on some other of your peers in terms of being in the VA system, having a rating, whatever the case. And so we moved to Boulder, Colorado, mostly because I just had always wanted to live in Colorado. I was still running a lot at the time, and we loved trail running, and so we moved to Boulder. My wife and I, we both got jobs, and I was finishing school. And so it was actually, for me, a pretty good transition. I worked for a company called Mountain Aviation, and helping coordinate and manage the logistics for private aircraft, private jets, out of Broomfield, Colorado, which is right between Boulder and Denver. And I kind of hated it. At the time, after I'd been working there for about 3 months, 3-4 months, and I had another job opportunity come up, and I took it almost immediately because it seems cool managing private jets, but you end up just doing catering all day, because it's their aircraft, and if they're paying $26,000 for a round trip flight, they deserve to have that be correct. And we did that, and so great respect for people that work in private aviation, but I kind of learned quickly after the Army that that version of private aviation might not have been the best fit for me. And so, that's a little on my transition. I'm not sure if I hit it all, but if you have any questions, let me.
So it sounds like you overall had a good transition because of the time frame, and you had at least some connections. And the average veteran does leave their first job within a few months to a few years. So that's another thing. As veterans are listening and you're trying to make that decision, you want to start thinking about that 2 years prior, and really thinking, if you're going to stay with your local community and you have those connections, it's a lot easier. If you go over and make the move to the place you want to be and it's fresh and it's new, I would recommend having 6 months to up to a year and a half of savings, even if you have a job, because you will go over, and more than likely that first one might not be the best one, because in a sense, when you go and you get married, you're at least dating your spouse and you get to know them. In a job, it's more like I looked at them from a Tinder app and I hope everything's okay. And then you find out, oh, not so much. So I think you really hit the nail on the head that at least overall that the Army and overall DoD is doing better as we're getting closer and closer to going and doing that. So I'm glad to go hear that, because I usually don't hear the great stories. So you left the job like after like a few months to about a year and everything else. So you're in a new position. Read on some things on some websites that you started around Valentine's Day this year. So what made you pivot to serve your current community?
Yeah. So at the end of last year, I was at the Dale Graham Foundation, and it's the Dale Graham Foundation is the largest veterans nonprofit in the state of Oklahoma. I had actually never imagined that I would be a nonprofit executive. At the time when we moved to Oklahoma, I had joined a program through, it's like, it was literally a job I found on USA Jobs when I was in Colorado. My wife was getting stationed in Oklahoma. I got a job working for Congress through a program called the Wounded Warrior Fellowship, not associated with the Wounded Warrior Project at all, commonly, combined. But the Wounded Warrior Fellowship is a program through the U.S. House of Representatives that employs veterans with at least a 20% disability rating to U.S. congressional offices. And so I applied for the program. The congressional office in Oklahoma called me, interviewed me. We had a great conversation. They kind of vocally said, yeah, you're our guy. They initiate that paperwork to DC. And then, I get an acceptance letter from DC, fly to DC, do the training, go back to Oklahoma, and I get to work in the congressional office. And that was the first time that I ever started serving veterans, because of course, as a veteran, in a congressional office, full of non-veterans, right? They often give the Wounded Warrior Fellow the casework for veterans. And casework in many congressional offices, like wherever you live around the country, tends to be one of the largest caseloads, just because the communication very often between the veteran and the VA can go sour. At some point, they fall through the cracks. There's some bureaucratic issue. And who do they call? They call their Congress member. And so that caseload tends to be very high. And so in a very short time, I learned an incredible amount about how to initiate congressional inquiries to the Department of Defense and to the Department of Veterans Affairs, whether it's the Veterans Benefit side or the Veterans Health side. And so after having done that for a while, I had the opportunity to apply for the Dale Graham Foundation. They were looking for a new executive director at the time, now CEO, kind of one in the same position. And I got that job and found myself the next 3 years trying to grow the largest veterans nonprofit in Oklahoma to be able to serve more, and not only veterans in Oklahoma, but start over time serving more and more veterans from across the entire country inside of that digital, web-based, HIPAA compliant, secure, remote VA claims platform. And after about a few years, we were looking at expanding into Nashville. I had opened up a Nashville initiative, and I had networked with the board of directors with Operation Song, who offered me a position to come and serve in a very similar role, but for a different mission and a very different vision, which is connecting professional songwriters with veterans to create music. And it's a very different mission, but it really called to me. I love Nashville, and getting the opportunity to work and be full-time in Nashville was certainly a draw. I'm from Nashville, so it was a great opportunity to come home. And so I accepted that job in January. And yeah, I think it was around February, the press releases start coming out for the job. And so extremely grateful for the chance. But the biggest draw to come here was the ability to continue to serve veterans, and in a platform in which I think America needs, which is, people love music. Veterans that go through our program have extremely successful, outcomes. And if you can take a veteran through the songwriting program and help them and their family be able to articulate and relate to their stories and give them a platform to be able to share their experiences, that's absolutely incredible, right? That's our goal. But what's great about this organization is that we also get to take it to the next level. And I get to share your story with Americans so that they can't forget the service and sacrifice of military veterans and their families, right? Like almost as Operation Song has a platform to like beat it into the heads of Americans that, hey, veterans and their families are still here. Military service members are still here. They're still across the world serving and sacrificing for your freedoms. And music is such an incredible platform to be able to do that, right? I was in Oklahoma for years, and when I was in Oklahoma fundraising, because of course an executive and nonprofit, you're essentially a fundraiser full time, right? Your job is to serve veterans full time and fundraise full time, because those are essentially the two things that you're asked to do. And so in Oklahoma, people are always like, well, you got to meet Toby Keith, right? Surely he'll give you money. He loves veterans. And it took about 3 years, but we eventually got a signed guitar from Toby Keith, not too soon before he passed away, unfortunately. But now that I'm here, I always joke with the team, right? Like, well, how many veterans do you think enlisted in the Army because of the courtesy of the red, white, and blue? Like, music is so extremely powerful, right? 2003 comes around, Toby Keith releases this song, and it's like a rallying cry for all of America. Like, regardless of your personal opinions of the war in Iraq or whatnot, the song itself can still be a testament to America being able to rally around the service and support of individuals, right? And then American Soldier comes out, and that song even drives that narrative further, that music has the ability to connect veterans and their experiences to the American populace, right? That relies on that service to be free.
I totally agree with that.
Operation Song.
And that's awesome. I can tell you a little backstory about Toby Keith that affected me.
Yeah.
I used to be an IT technician. I've done a bunch of different jobs, and music does impact not as much me as the rest of the world, but it does for the rest of the world. I'm an anomaly. I don't like food either. So I'm like the weird veteran. Anyway, so I go over and I'm doing IT, and this airman, I won't say the name, was so inspired by the Toby Keith song that he thought he was sending it to a few of his friends on the email server when email was new. He hit base all and sent it to 5,000 people, and the files were small back in the days, but when you think about it, 5 megs times 5,000 people, including the installation commander, the installation chief, everybody that's on there. Oh, AppSent was on the base, so they sent it to that, so that's Air Force Central Command.
Yeah.
Everybody from civilian, everybody else had this email. Oh, we stumbled upon that, and he got written up. His inspiration of the song was great, but not everybody on the base needed to have a copy of that 5 meg song.
He just shared like an MP3 version of Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue or something.
He did. He did a file upload to the email, and he thought he was sending it to a couple, and he sent it out to the whole base. Classic. And it wasn't one of those approval things from public affairs or anything else. He literally sent it. Yeah. And then I saw that because I'm like a comm troop, and I'm like, dude, his career is over. He might be patriotic, but he might not be much longer. Yeah. I don't know whatever happened to the gentleman. Hopefully he has a funny story and not a regretful story, but yeah, that went out base-wide. So everybody knew about red, white, and blue. And then the funny part is everybody started sending it to everybody else too. When email was new, it's like, oh, this is awesome. They sent to more. I'm like, dude, you're blowing up our servers. Like, so music is powerful. It's just, all it took is just that. And nowadays, definitely with all the veterans have gone through Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and just that transformation, I'm very proud to hear this because this is the first time I've heard of Operation Song. So I'm glad I'm able to uplift this message out.
Yeah. And honestly, I hadn't heard of it either until the beginning. I had moved here in 2023. I worked for the Dale Graham Foundation for another year as I tried to grow, the nationwide platform and programs. And I hadn't heard about Operation Song until I moved to Nashville, right? Which of course is where Operation Song is headquartered, and really fell in love with the way that they serve veterans and their families and the mission and vision, right? Because the mission is to be able to serve veterans and their families through the power of songwriting, to empower them, to give them that platform, right? And to give them the experience of songwriting, which can be extremely cathartic, extremely powerful, extremely impactful on individuals who have a story to tell, whether it's of sorrow or of service, right? But the vision is what's just as enticing, right? Is the ability to try and grow and scale across the country and give every veteran a platform to be able to share their story through song. And then try and find a way to share those stories with every American so that they continue to support veterans, right? Like I kind of envision a future where we have so many songs that are prevalent in Americans platforms, right? Whether it's via film or radio or streaming, even if it's not Operation Song, but if we can facilitate a culture in which America rallies around veterans to the extent where it's sustainable, right? And they eventually act more consistently on the behalf of veterans and their service, right? Because I can't, especially working in, the VA community and the accredited VSO side, you always hear about Congress members and organizations that want to do away with VA benefits that, have very different opinions than what most Americans probably think some members of Congress have about the VA, about veterans benefits, about veterans programs. And so we'd love to be able to drive a narrative across the entire country that rallies individuals behind the service and sacrifice of veterans, active military, and their families, and ensure that we never get to a point where Congress starts drastically changing VA programs because we've slowly allowed the culture to get to that point. So
I think that's beautiful. So you're basically, the Operation Song is to bring empathy to the American citizen of the sympathetic things that the veterans go through, so they continue to go over and be that patriot that can help us to go over and to thrive and not survive. Because you could have been a destroyed story after 10 years in the service, everything else, type 1 diabetes. You could have went through depression. You could have went through anxiety. I don't know if you went to think about unliving yourself and whatnot. But when you have those patriots that are being empathetic and taking care of us because we took care of them, then we're empowered to do it again as a patriot further on for our brethren. So that's what I think of Operation Song, is that you're bringing music, which brings empathy and moves the hearts of the patriots, so we can continue to go over and serve and make that war hero to superhero transformation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's cyclical, right? It starts with serving veterans to a really high standard and their families, giving them the experience they deserve, the platform they deserve, providing them with a really beautiful song written by a professional songwriter in a songwriting room or via virtual, whatever platform the veteran chooses. And then the cyclical part comes, and then sharing that story so that America supports that next veteran in line, right? And that's the process of veterans nonprofits around the country, right? Regardless of what their mission is, they're all trying to serve veterans and then convince America that service to that veteran was valid and warranted, and give me money so I can do it again for the next veteran, right? And in the whole time, you're trying to convince people that no, what you do isn't also available at the VA, right? And that's also a very challenging part about working in the veterans community, is that, of course, there's the VA and the DoD, and then there is 45,000 veteran and military nonprofits registered with the IRS, scattered throughout the country, that all have varied missions, but often overlapping, sometimes identical missions. And so there's a lot of cannibalism, unfortunately, inside of that community that can sometimes get a little tense in terms of all these organizations trying to grow and serve veterans at the same time. And all the meanwhile trying to convince people that, yeah, again, what they do isn't available at the VA, even though the VA has a $400 billion annual budget, right? Like, you can imagine, actually, I'll change it. You can't imagine giving the VA $400 billion and then at the same time thinking we also need to give money to 45,000 military and veterans nonprofits across the country, because the VA and the DoD can't accomplish all of the things for military veterans and their families that we as a community think they should, which, if you've worked in the system, is a true and an actual reality. But many Americans don't realize that until veterans nonprofits come, knocking.
I would think of it as simple as this to understand, to give to our patriots. Imagine you had $5,000 a month in your checking account, and instead of going over and just taking care of your family, you're taking care of families in 2,000 counties and going over and doing that. It's near impossible. So the VA has the same thing, as they're taking care of roughly 22 million service-connected veterans, averaging about $1,000 a month for compensation. Then you add a hospital that's probably about 100 to 200 million a year, I'm estimating. $400 billion sounds amazing. But when we've had so many people come from Iraq and Afghanistan, including yourself, going over and realizing that this rips your life as you serve and you get sick, and it's either through service or through an actual mission hurt. That's the reason why there's 45,000 nonprofits.
Yeah.
No government can go over and solve the problem. It's individual hearts and minds that come together to build organizations, just like myself, that I saw that veterans are not getting transformation from the prayer room to the boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I go over and uplift veterans organizations like this, Operation Song, because you're not uplifted. And most people assume that the nonprofit or even the for-profit business is uplifted, and it's truly not, because of the chaos and the noise and so many things.
Yep.
So I'm very thankful to do Operation Song. Hopefully one day get out to Nashville and go check that place out, because it sounds amazing to go over and take what's in your heart and bring it to others. So I'm very much appreciated for you being on the show. So we got a couple more questions before we close out. These ones are going to be fast fire ones, so because we want to make sure that people stay tuned in. So what's the secret fuel when pressure and tough times come? Because you've been just through a few.
You will make it to the end. And that sounds really basic, but one of the things that I learned, so actually my freshman year of, this will be quick, my freshman year of college, right? I was really, really fit, and the University of Tampa Army ROTC department decided they were going to send me to air assault school. And I literally never been in the Army before. I'd just been in Army ROTC for a semester. And they sent me to air assault school, and I fail out on like the second day, right? I was completely unprepared, unprofessional, and I was nervous all the time, making mistakes, and I got dropped from air assault school. Very embarrassing part of my life. I went to air assault school later and passed and did well at Fort Campbell. But one of the things that I didn't realize then was that like graduation day is going to come. Whether you're there or not is up to you. You know what I mean? And so sometimes all you have to do is just endure, and the hardest 11 days in the Army, as they say, is going to come. Same thing, you're starting, you transition, you're starting a really intensive college program. That graduation day is going to come, right? All you have to do is get there, right? And the things that you need to do in order to get there. It's so easy to quit nowadays because there's so many other options in the world that I think, veterans sometimes can quit a little early, where it's like, you really just need to endure and know that you're capable of tough times and just stick through it, right? Wake up every day, do the thing you got to do, and get to graduation day, because you're going to get there, right? But not if you don't realize that, like, it is going to come. So I don't know if that helps anyone else, but it always helped me. I know when I was at SEER school, it was always helpful to remember that, like, hey, graduation day isn't known. Like, all these instructors know when graduation day is. So it might feel like I've been here forever. I might feel overwhelmed with a certain scenario, but like graduation day is right there. Like, just keep focused on that and you'll be all right.
I like that, going over and focusing it, because it will happen even if you're there or not,
Right.
That day is going to happen no matter where your life is at. You could have moved 1,000 miles away. That graduation day is going to happen. So
yeah,
that's awesome. And the last one, hopefully not too much of a doozy. We gave them a little preparation in the back room, was 3 superhero tactics. So either going over and envisioning yourself about 10 to 20 years younger, or people that you're mentoring now in Operation Song. What would you give them as 3 tactics to go from surviving to thriving?
Yeah. So the first one is going to be, and it's the number one thing that I look for in team members. Fortunately, since I've started my civilian side, I've had the opportunity of interviewing probably 1,000 individuals for different positions that I've hired over the course of the years. And the number one thing that I look for is communication. Like, when I talk to someone, do they have the ability to communicate and articulate what they're trying to say really well? And do I think that they'll have the ability to communicate positively through challenges, right? Because at the end of the day, the job position that you're applying for, the interview that you're there for, is likely open because the previous person either was doing poorly or not communicating well in the process, right? There was a relationship issue. And so I always tell, and it's very similar to the military, right? Communication is a huge portion of of how individuals in all different branches are evaluated, whether it be for your ORB or your OER or I can't remember what the enlist. I think it's the ERB, in enlisted records brief, something like that. But yeah, communication for sure is number one. The second I had kind of already touched on, which is just grit, right? Like so many people quit nowadays because it got hard. And I find that funny because most of the time they signed up for something challenging, right? And then the moment it gets challenging, they quit, right? But you're a veteran, right? You're an active duty service member, right? Like you understand what it means to serve and sacrifice, right? And there's a reason they call it service, because it's not easy. If anyone could do it, they would. But America chose you. You chose yourself. Anything that you do that's going to be challenging is going to take grit, right? So if you're wanting to get out and you're wanting to start a business, you need to know that it's going to be extremely hard. And most people are going to quit. And you have to decide whether or not you're going to be one of those people, because the people who decide to continue going are going to be the ones who start multi-million-dollar businesses, who make it to, an organization CEO role or COO. Whatever dreams you have, you likely have chosen them because they're challenging. And they're challenging because they're hard, and most people won't do it, right? So in America today, people are relatively soft, right? Like most people are used to having their phone on them 24/7. They're used to the luxuries of ease and convenience. If you can be tough, if you can have grit, if you can have the ability to suffer and continue to march through, like you probably have many times in your military career, you'll be fine. And I think that's one of the things that really leads veterans to being so successful in the civilian world, is because most Americans quit before, like they quit long before it's even reasonable to quit because of not having an outcome that they wanted, right? They start a business, they send out a couple emails, they post a few things on Facebook, and they're upset that their startup isn't $1 million organization yet. Like it's going to take years, right? Like you have to know this going in, that if all you do is continue to grind and work, just like you did in the military, right? Like a road march, right? You got a 40-pound rucksack on and you're on mile 1 and you're upset that you're not at mile 12 yet. Like you know exactly what you need to do to get to the finish line. And you know it's going to be painful. Drink water and march, right? Like just go. And so the grit portion, I think, is really easy for veterans, I think, to lose out on, because like they see the civilian world as like easy, right? So you think that like, oh, well, I'll be a civilian now. I won't have to worry about this and this, and it'll be easier. And no, it's going to be just as hard. It's going to be hard in a different way. But the only difference now is that your competition is a fraction as capable as you are at suffering. And so I'm a big David Goggins guy. Maybe that's a little cheesy, but who's going to carry the boats kind of guy. I find him inspirational, right? Some people don't like that he talks so much, but I find that type of motivation really helpful, right? Which is just, if you keep going, you'll be fine, especially for veterans who are used to suffering. So the last one is probably my most important one, and I'm sorry if I'm going over, but your net worth for the next 10 years of your life is going to be not because of your bank account, but because of your Rolodex. And he touched on that. And we talked a little bit about that at the beginning here, which is, when you're getting out, it very, very unlikely matters how much money you have in your bank account, but the connections you have, and when I say Rolodex, I mean, like literally business cards. I've got probably 6,000 or 7,000 business cards that I've collected over the past 5 years, because everywhere I go, I meet people, I try and build relationships, and I collect business cards. Your job, your dream job, is going to come from this, not your bank account, right? Because you're not going to be able to buy your dream job, whatever that is, unless you start it yourself and build it, which is going to be challenging. Your net worth is going to be your Rolodex and your digital Rolodex. So get on LinkedIn, connect with anyone you can, communicate with anyone you can. Go to coffees that you don't know what the agenda is for, right? Go to networking events. There's so many veterans networking events. Whatever city you live in is going to have some sort of veterans networking event in or within 100 miles. Drive, go, network, get business cards, give out your own business cards. If you don't have business cards, make them, even if it's just your personal phone number and your dream job on it and your name, and network. Networking is going to be your key to success in whatever field you want to get into, whether it's aerospace engineering, woodworking, entrepreneurship, please network, because it will be by far be the most successful thing for you long term is your network. And that's why, he had mentioned earlier that distance can be challenging, right? You have a network in, San Antonio, where you're stationed right now, and then you leave that network for your hometown, and you haven't lived in your hometown for 15 years, right? So you're going to have to rebuild that network, right? You got to rebuild that Rolodex. So I think those are three pretty good things that I've used and leveraged, communication, toughness, grit, just raw effort, which is pretty rare in the civilian world, in my opinion. And then focus on your Rolodex and not your bank account. And when those two things are in conflict, I would choose the Rolodex over the bank account any day.
Well, there you go. I thought of an acronym while you were talking about grit. A new way to look at it is God's riches in trials, because at the end, you go long enough, those riches will become abundance. And it's the trial. And it's sometimes not even financial. It could be emotional. It could be spiritual. It could be anything else. And just having that pride of going over and getting through that hurdle. So I loved what you go over and talked about. I loved having you on the show. Have some couple ideas I'd like to talk about off air, but hey, we'll talk about that. Last little bit is for you to close out the show. So I always love the guests to close out the show. So you tell us a little bit more about Operation Song, and then a good quote. You can do a David Goggins quote. It's okay. So hope I pronounce his name right, man. I'm horrible at pronouncing names, but you get to close out the show. So one more shout out for Operation Song, and then a quote, and then I'm going to go to credits.
Yeah. So, well, first, thanks for having me on. And I will just go into a pitch for Operation Song. Of course, our mission is to write with veterans and their families. And so we'd love if you onboarded, if you're interested in music, if you're not interested in music, either way, it's a really incredible opportunity to get paired with literally a professional songwriter. We have many songwriters on our team that have written #1 hits, multiple #1 hits. Our founder has written with Trisha Yearwood, Keith Urban, tons of really famous country music singers, and has songs on the #1. Our other founder is a writer for Blake Shelton. He wrote Old Red by Blake Shelton. And so our founders, our songwriters, our staff are extremely well connected in music. And I only say that because it allows us to connect to the most professional and incredible songwriters in the entire world. And if you onboard to our program through operationsong.org, you can literally click a button on the homepage of the website that says write your song. We will pair you with a professional songwriter, whether it's in person, if you want to write on Music Row inside of our writing room in Nashville. We can also pair you virtually through our virtual program. We get a grant from the Academy of Country Music, thankfully, to be able to write virtually with veterans across the country. And we pair veterans and songwriters up, either via Zoom, FaceTime, whatever's most convenient for the veteran and the songwriter. And they do a songwriting session over the course of 4 or 5 hours. And at the end of that, the veteran gets an MP3 file that documents their story. And I'll tell you, it can be about whatever you want to write about. It doesn't have to be about your military career. You could literally write a song to propose to your girlfriend. And I know because we had a veteran a couple of years ago that did that. And she said yes. And he didn't talk about his military experience. He didn't talk about being in the military at all. And so any veteran, active duty military, or their family, right, their spouse, their children, they can also write songs. We also write songs with Gold Star family members. So if your veteran has passed, in the line of duty in service, we'd love to write with you as well. And all you have to do is go to our website and do that. I got to think of a quote now. Man, I'm not great with quotes. So I guess I'll go with my favorite. It was Abraham Lincoln. I'm pretty sure it's actually, you've probably seen it because if you've ever been to a VA facility, most VA facilities have this on the wall. And it's one of the things that I always felt was, which was really, really powerful. And the summary of the quote is, we should take care of those who have borne the battle. Right. And that's kind of the mantra of the VA. And in fact, some VAs have tried to change it because I think it had the word he in there. And we're starting to open that up, of course, to female veterans as that population grows. But that's one of the things I love about getting to serve in the veterans community is that we get to take care of them who borne the battle. right? Because veterans sign up, right? And you sign the dotted line, right? Hey, I'm willing to die for this country if you need me to. But a lot of veterans forget that on the other side of their enlistment is the other side of that contract, which is the side America signs. You promise to go to war. You promise to serve. You promise to be honorable and fight for our country. We promise to take care of you if you come home, when you come home. And God forbid you don't come home, we promise to take care of your family. And